What the heck is boondocking? And will I be able to take a shower? I'm Patty Hunt, and you're listening to the RV Life Podcast. Boondocking is certainly different than a lot of things in the RV life lifestyle. Today's guest spent over 100 days boondocking, and she's going to share how you can too. Now, I've traveled full time for over 3 years and have been without power, sewer, and water, but I'm not sure if that's actually considered boondocking. Today's guest will share what boondocking is and all things how to boondock, even if you just want to do it for a couple of days. The RV Life podcast was created to educate, entertain, and explore the RV lifestyle. My mission has been to inspire you to get out and live life fully. Maybe that's stepping into boondocking, maybe just a weekend in a state park, or anything in between. Whatever that is, today's guest is sure to help you along the way. So it's now time for today's fun fact, but I'd like to change things up. I guess I get bored with things easily. So the fun fact segment of the podcast, I'm looking to change. And I'm looking for you, my listeners' help on how I name this section. So here's what I'm looking to do. In this section, I'm looking to give updates and things that are happening in the RV world, things that you might need to know about, things I could share with you. And so I'm looking for the name to call this segment. Some of the ideas I've already gotten is what you need to know, or RV ramblings, RV report, any of these names and anything else you want to add. I am going to put this on my social media channel for you to help me name this section of the RV Life podcast. Now, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at RV Life Podcast. Send me a message, put a comment in, and let me know what you think this section of the RV Life podcast should be called. Okay, so wherever we're calling it today, it is brought to you by Open Road Resorts, and they have 5 amazing locations. There are 2 in Montana, 1 in Idaho, 1 in Texas, and their newest location in Nebraska called West Omaha KOA. And this campground looks amazing. It's highly amenitized and it is beautiful. But today I want to talk about heading to Yellowstone. So if you want to go to Yellowstone, Red Rock Park is outside the western entrance of Yellowstone National Park. And what I'd like is that they now have rentals. So you can rent an Airstream, you can rent a cabin. And this is great for somebody like me who right now doesn't have an RV. So now I'm going to travel for a while and hit the cabins, the tiny homes, the Airstream rentals, maybe even rent a vehicle from my friends at Fireside RV Rentals. There's a lot of options here. Red Rock RV Park has tiny homes and Airstreams. I've always thought tiny homes were really cool. So this is my opportunity to get to Yellowstone, rent a tiny home. It's all there. It's all in one. Okay. So now, as I've said, this section is really about updating you, giving you information of things to look out for. One of the things I'm super excited about is being in Hershey in September for the Hershey RV show. And for the 3rd year, RV Life is having a party. So that is September 12th, the RV Life Hershey after party. And as I said, it's the 3rd annual. I am honored to be asked to host it again this year. And this event was amazing. Now, the information will be coming. It'll be posted in all of the show notes of every podcast. So any podcast you listen to, it'll also be announced on our social media channels. So check that out. Should be announced shortly after this podcast goes live. That is going to be an amazing event. Save the date, September 12th from 6 to 10. And my partner podcast, RV Entrepreneur Podcast, is also doing an event during the day that is going to be an amazing workshop. So stay tuned for that. The other thing I want to update you on is RVers Top Talent. If you're familiar with RV TV, they're doing a special that's called RVers Top Talent. It's like that show we've all heard about where people with talent come together, show their talent. And this particular show contest, you have a chance to win $5,000. So if you have a talent, you want to go to RV TV and check out this RVers Top Talent. Now, I don't have a talent. I really don't have much talent. Speaking on the podcast is not necessarily a talent. But again, I'm honored to be asked to co-host that show. So I'm super excited about it. You've got plenty of time, but you want to go and submit if you have a talent. I know there are a lot of talented RVers out there. The third thing I want to update you on, Vanessa Russell was on the podcast. She's from The Adventure Detour. So Vanessa, Scott, and their daughter, Sissy, have been traveling full-time for a very long time. Her episode was on May 29th, and she gave a lot of valuable information on how to RV for less money on a budget, RVing on a budget. A lot of us are looking to do that. Now, Vanessa sent me an email the other day and said that she nominated the RV Life podcast for the RV Share Best RV and Camping Podcast 2024 Campies. So I'm very humbled and honored by that. And if you have enjoyed the RV Life podcast, I would love to have your vote. Okay, so that's the updates for this week. There are a lot of them, and that's brought to you by Open Road Resorts. But I'm excited to jump into today's guest. Today's guest will help us understand what boondocking is. She brings excellent tips on what to consider before you go. She has traveled full-time for 4 years with her husband and 3 kids in their renovated toy hauler. The family has visited 49 states, including a summer in Alaska. Prior to travel, she was an actor and a homeschool elementary school teacher. Now she is a family content creator, professional blogger, and ebook author. O'Fallon Adventures was created to inspire families to adventure together more. You can find Kate and her family on Instagram and her blogs and how-to ebooks on her website, o'fallonadventures.com. Kate O'Fallon, welcome to the RV Life podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you. I know we met for social media, actually, which is where so many people, we had a conversation and there's just so much information. So I just want to jump right in so you can start giving all this valuable information to our listeners. Now, you have a really interesting story as to how you started full-time travel. Will you share that story with my listeners?
Sure. I do feel like we have an unconventional RV entree. We're probably the last people that anyone would have expected to become RVers living off grid. We lived in New York City for almost 15 years. My husband and I worked in the entertainment industry professionally. And what changed for us was what changed things for a lot of folks, COVID. And my husband's job went remote. My oldest was in kindergarten. Kindergarten went remote. Everything went remote. And all of a sudden, we were left sitting in the city wondering why we were paying really exorbitant rent when we didn't need to be there in person. And all the things that we loved about city life were closed. And so we decided our lease was up and we decided, let's go check out some Airbnbs for the summer and we'll come back in the fall in time for school. That was 4 years ago. So leaving for the summer turned into 4 years. We started out using monthly Airbnbs, and we did that for about a year and a half. And we were loving the travel so much. But what I was missing was having a consistent home base. And all the things about Airbnbs that bug you, right? There's always something weird about each one. The pillows are really uncomfortable, or this one has only one fork, or there's no trash can in this one. And I was like, tired of the constant packing and the constant problem solving in Airbnbs, and finally convinced my husband to get an RV. He was very wary because we didn't even own a car for 10 years, much less a giant truck and towing things around. And I finally convinced him, and we bought an older toy hauler in cash. It's a 2007, and totally gutted it. We spent 4 months just like ripping it apart and building it to be exactly what we wanted it to be. And then had to learn how to tow all the other RV things. But I do joke that, like, as city people, we probably were the last people you would expect to be driving a diesel Super Duty truck and a giant trailer around.
So I have to take you back. You actually stayed in Airbnbs, and you had 2 kids at the time.
Yeah, when we left the city, I was pregnant.
Okay, so you were pregnant when you left. Airbnbs, I think you said for 2 years you did that. Am I correct? Or
Yeah, we did a year and a half of moving around in Airbnbs, and then bought the RV, and I knew I wanted to renovate it, but I needed a place to do that. And so we stayed in one Airbnb at the end of that for 6 months with a big yard that we backed the trailer into. And I would walk out to the front yard and work on the RV every day. So yeah, a total of 2 years in Airbnbs.
okay, so now 3 kids, and they're now 3, 6, and 8. You've been traveling for 4 years. So the youngest was actually born on the road. Can you tell us about that experience? Being in an RV, being pregnant and having a baby.
I think people think it was more dramatic than it was, honestly. And I don't know, maybe it's because it was my third baby. If it was my first, I never would have done this, right? But my third kid, I know what I'm doing. There are bigger problems in the world right now. It was very casual. And, when you're getting pregnancy care, it's pretty infrequent up until the end. So what I was doing was that first 6 months of the pregnancy, I was like circling back to New York to just see my doctors once a month or once every 6 weeks. Or I think I did one virtual appointment in between, and then we were making it work, but the care is pretty infrequent in the beginning. And so that was pretty easy. And then at the end, we were settled in one spot. So by the 3rd trimester, we settled down so that I could have those more bi-weekly appointments, more testing and stuff like that. But it was doable. It's more paperwork. Everything with being nomadic, I feel like, is just more paperwork, but it's all achievable.
Oh, yes. And I think that this is probably a topic that a lot of people don't talk about. I don't think we've ever talked about it on the podcast. So just give people an idea. I've had 3 kids, been close to the hospital every time, long, long time ago. So very different world we live in, but it's possible. Maybe an ebook that you could write on that. I know you've written some ebooks. If you haven't, that might be a good one. Okay, so let's get into, you started Ophelan, and I feel like I keep saying it wrong, adventures.com. How do you say your last name so I can get it right?
Oh, Phelan Adventures. Yeah, that's there. Everybody struggles.
Okay, I think I got it. You've inspired families to travel. Where did that start when you said, let's, start offering information? How did that all start? You're on the road. You've got 3 kids now. One is a baby. When did you decide to do the website, share information with people, educate people?
I feel like I've always been, like, my whole life, it's taken different forms, but I've always been an information sharer. I used to run a blog. I used to run a podcast, and the topic has varied. But that's just who I am, an information sharer. My friend calls me a thought leader, which feels a little bit presumptuous to call myself, but that's the way I think of it, as information, thoughts, sharing. That just comes really naturally to me. But what I feel like makes sharing information about family adventures really important is that I do feel like culturally we have a tendency to have kids, and as women feel like we're either putting our dreams on a back burner, or that doing the things that we used to love feels really difficult. And one of the things that I think is really important about adventuring together as a family is that we can show our children that we can still be full humans, even once we're parents, and B, that we can share in these adventures together. And I think it's really important to encourage families that even when it's difficult, that we can get out there and do these things. And whatever that looks like for you, that it's okay to still have dreams and still have aspirations, still do things like travel the world, even though I have 3 small children. And a lot of people might be inclined to say, you shouldn't do that, or you should wait till your kids are out of the house. And honestly, sometimes I do look at retired folks having a glass of wine at sunset quietly and think that looks really nice when we're dealing with like wild children, feral dinner time. They're not their best time of day. But I do also think there's something really rich and sweet about traveling full time with our kids and the experiences that we have because of them. People are so friendly to families with small children. We've made a ton of friends that I wouldn't have otherwise because they're like just charmed by small children. And we have chosen different sort of experiences than I might have chosen for myself if it was just me. And the memories that we've made together, honestly, absolutely priceless. It sounds like a cliche, but no matter what happens with our family going forward, this set of years that we've spent all day, every day together and adventuring together, you can't take that back.
Absolutely. And again, and I'm on the other side of it. I'm sitting outside at sunset. I don't do the glass of wine, but that idea of sitting there quietly, and I could go back and look at what it was like when I had kids. I raised my 3 kids, and then Dan and I got together, and there were 2 more, and they were older. And now to look back and look at that contrast, I wish that we had done more of that, because it does seem like it's difficult and a struggle. But I think sitting in a home with 3 kids, there were days it was a struggle. Listen, dinner was the witching hour for sure. And then you're waiting for
Dinner
bedtime.
is so hard.
Yes. And then from then on, it's something about the sunset, but we'll talk about that at another time. As the sun's
It's no
setting,
one's kid's best hour.
yes. So and the thing that I think, if I went back and can say, Dan and I have 5 kids, 4 of them have kids. So we have 9 grandkids. And I said, if parents could be grandparents first, that would be the greatest thing, because I can look back, not judging what anybody's doing, not judging what my kids are doing. They're all raising kids differently. They're all incredible parents. And it is a struggle for sure. It is challenging. It's probably the most challenging job anybody's going to do. And that said, I believe now that I'm past it, can be done in an RV. Again, whether that's full-time or part-time or just getting out there sometime. As we do on the podcast, we go in different directions as they come. I want to jump in though, because now you're talking about 3 little kids and you're going out there boondocking. So first of all, explain to our audience what boondocking means, because I think it has different sort of definitions. So what does boondocking mean?
Yeah, I like to say that boondocking is a really silly word, because it is, for just not having hookups. And that can mean a variety of things, like you said. To me, true boondocking is no hookups whatsoever. But there's also a spectrum of no hookups, right? We can have just power, or we can have power and water, or we can have less power than our rig is maybe wanting, or we could have a spigot at the site but not hooked up to the rig. There's definitely a spectrum of what not full hookups means. But traditionally, pure boondocking, if you're a purist, would mean 0 hookups whatsoever, and you are self-sufficient. And that's mostly what we do. But again, that can also take a variety of forms. Like you can boondock in a casino parking lot or a Walmart parking lot, or you can boondock on public land, on BLM land, on national forest land. There's just it's a wide catch-all kind of term. But what I think is most important is just learning the difference between how your rig functions when it's plugged into all the things versus when it's not plugged into any of the things. And when I tell people who are not familiar with RV life about the difference between these things, I feel like living in an RV with all your hookups is really not that dissimilar to apartment life or like a tiny home village. Like you have some stuff to learn about RV life specifically, right? What you can and can't flush, and the maintenance that an RV requires specifically. But in general, it's not a huge leap from living in an apartment to living in a comfortable RV. But boondocking really is like a different set of skills. It's figuring out, where are we getting our power from? How are we conserving our water, which to me is honestly the trickiest part. And then what are we doing with our wastewater and our trash and our all of that?
Right.
And how are we finding places to park? RV parks are pretty straightforward. You look them up on the internet and then you drive in and park. Boondocking is a lot more complex.
Right. And we're going to get into these details because I want my listeners to get a good idea of what that looks like. What's funny is, and I asked you what boondocking means, because when I researched, and I like to look at what words mean, there was a rabbit hole. So boondocking is, like you said, a strange word. And there was a rabbit hole because there are people that believe, like you said, purists, boondocking is not in their mind going into a campground and not having hookups. That's not boondocking. Boondocking is when you're on natural ground, not necessarily somebody who put stones down or cement. So there's really these very different ideals and belief systems, I guess it is. What we're saying, boondocking, and again, my whole thing is do what works for you, call it what you want. There's this great debate between what is RVing as opposed to camping. Do what you want, call it what you want. Let's not get hung up. But for the most part, we're talking about boondocking being not connected to power, sewer, water, and you're going to help us figure out some of the things we need to know so that we could safely do that. So if you could, let's start one thing at a time. Where is the best place to start? I believe you talked about the kind of rig you have, what kind of RV camper you have, right?
Yeah, and I agree with you. I am not personally a boondocking purist whatsoever. Do what works for you, park where you want to, make it work however you want to. And I would disagree that being in a campground without hookups at all is not boondocking. I think that's boondocking. You need all the same skills. The only thing that's different is that you're paying for it. So honestly, we don't do a lot of that because it's pretty easy to boondock for free once you get the hang of it. But yeah, I think the first thing you want to think about if you are planning to be a big boondocker, and again, if you're just going to do it a night or two at a time as you travel places, you can be a lot more casual about all of this stuff that I'm going to talk about. But if you're planning to spend long periods of time off grid, then you do want to think about the rig that you're in or that you're thinking about being in before you make the leap. Or if you've already made the leap, think about what your limitations are going to be with the rig that you have. Honestly, one of the reasons why I try to teach people about boondocking is because I thought I would be the last person to ever boondock. I was like, I love my hot showers. I can't do that.
Me too.
We ended up accidentally with a rig that's great for boondocking. And so now I'm like, okay, but if you're thinking you might want to boondock, think about this because we got lucky and not everyone does. Our rig has really big tanks. So what our rig has 110 gallons of fresh water that we can carry with us. And we have 2 gray tanks and a really decently sized black tank. And so those are the things that are the hardest to modify on your rig. A lot of the other limitations we can make accommodations for. But I would say if you really do think you're going to be a boondocker, to consider what your tanks look like first and foremost, because that's going to be your limiting factor in how long you can last.
Okay. So tank space, what I'm hearing, fresh water that you need for, everything. And again, I want to just break down for people who are new to all of that. Some of our listeners are just thinking about starting out the RV life. So let's break it down. Then it's whatever water you use then goes into either the gray tank or the black tank. And so we have to consider those things. You also have to consider the number of your family. You're talking about 5 people that you take with you. So that's something that people need to consider. More people, more water that's needed. Once people have thought that through, if they haven't bought a rig yet, thinking about the kind of rig they buy based on how long they want to be out, what would be the next consideration that people should think about? So they have tank space for say 20 days. I don't know, take space. I don't think you could. Wait a minute. Let me think about this. So I had
Not with 5 people.
no. So let's get this for real instead of just arbitrary. I had 110-gallon freshwater tank. I believe it was 110, 120 gallons, just two of us. The longest I ever boondocked was when I went to the Reno Air Show, and that was 6 days. And I was doing video, so I needed that shower and doing my hair every day. There was no skipping days. There's no hat. I don't wear hats. Maybe I should start wearing a hat because you could hide the messy
Or
hair.
a headband.
A headband. Yeah, I don't do any of that. I need somebody to come on to talk about how to
braid the top
braid.
of your hair. That's
Yeah.
another trick. I'm like, if
Yeah,
it's looking
that's your
greasy
trick.
on the top, little
Braid
French
it.
braid on the top.
Okay. I'm great at French braiding. I just don't know how I'd feel about I got to embrace that, I guess, so I can go long. But I will tell you, we showered, and I'm talking military type shower every day for 5 straight days, and we still had water and tank space. So that was a great thing. But again, it's going to depend on how many people, how long the shower, how much showering you need to do, all of those considerations. So you're probably looking at, let's say, a week or so that you could be out with that kind of tank space, maybe longer. What do you think?
So I will say we can max out if we're very careful. I think our longest stretch without dumping or filling was 15 days.
Oh, wow. For 5 of you.
Yes, for 5 of us. I will say, like, the kids are not showering every single day.
Right.
We're washing hands and feet, and we are definitely doing military showers. And I'm also not washing my hair every single day. But yeah, public land generally, you're going to max out at 14 days anyways, because most public land, you're allowed to stay for 14 days or less. And we were in one spot where we were on a 14-day limit, but everyone ended up sick. And so we stayed one extra day because we were just too sick to move on that 14th day. And so we tested our limits and made it to 15. But there are ways to mitigate running out of water, say, or having full tanks. It just requires more effort. But I will say we can stretch 5 people to 15 days if we're very careful.
Okay, so we're covering water. I do want to take a minute to talk about my friends at Clear 2O. When I am hooked up, I use the 3-stage water filter. It's an amazing system that they've come up with. It's a carbon block instead of the granulated carbon, so it gets the clean water down to 1 micron. Might be something people are not familiar with. Getting it as low as you can is a great thing for clean, fresh water. But if you're in an RV and you're boondocking, then they now have, or they've had a pitcher that you just pour the water in and it filters it. And I have had this pitcher for a couple months now. The house that I live in, now I'm in a house right now, as most people know, the water was so bad that it actually upset my stomach. That's how bad it was. And the person that I'm staying with has had no problem with it, but maybe I'm more sensitive. And I started using this pitcher a couple months ago, and it's been fantastic. So it tastes better, smells better. I could actually drink it. So I highly recommend Clear 2O. You could go to clear20.com, use RV Life Podcast to get a discount. They are offering 15% to RV Life Podcast listeners. And that's all going to be in the show notes. But when we're talking about water, clean water, certainly important. So now let's talk about, I would imagine the next thing is power. And there's a lot to that, I'm sure. Where you're going to be, what the temperature is going to be. It's going to be really hot. It's going to be really cold. Heating, air conditioning, power. For me, we have in the RV a residential refrigerator. Some people have residential. Some people have an RV refrigerator that can run on propane, throwing a lot of stuff out there. So my biggest thing was making sure the refrigerator stayed cold. That's always an issue. Getting up in the morning and making sure I could have my cappuccino. So my cappuccino machine must be able to run. And then, of course, air conditioning if it's hot, heat if it's cold. Give us your take on power.
Yeah, so even your intro question, you were like, there's 85 different concerns. I'm like, yeah, that's fair. There are a lot of ways that you can come at the power question. And I just want to say right off that I feel like one of the reasons I was intimidated to boondock is that I see so many people with $10,000 solar setups so they can run everything like they're on grid. And that's awesome. No judgment. If you can afford that and you want to do that, like if you have the weight for it, more power to you. But I was like, we have a 2007 rig and it does not make sense to me to spend $10,000 on solar for it. And so I was really intimidated to even think about it. And in the end, that was silly because we spent just several $1,000s on solar and we have absolutely plenty for our needs. But you don't even have to have solar to boondock if you're not going to do it all the time. You can have a generator. Ours has an onboard generator. You can also buy an external generator for relatively inexpensively. But I will say if you want to do it for any amount of time, you should look at your solar options. And again, we spent $4,000 and it was more expensive because we did it in Alaska where everything is more expensive. But we ended up with, I think we have 800 watts of solar on the roof and we upgraded our batteries. So we have 500 amp hours of batteries and a small inverter. And we didn't do the install ourselves because, again, we were in Alaska and it was really expensive to get the parts even shipped to us. But you could even do it for probably half that if you were willing to be adventurous and not pay for the labor. And we chase good weather. So we don't use the air conditioning off grid, I will say, because that's a big power hog. But we could if we wanted to turn the generator on. But what we have for several $1,000s is plenty of power for our needs. Our fridge is not a residential one, so it does run on propane, but you still need power to run your propane fridge. And we have power to run the lights. We have power to run the water pump. Honestly, I feel like the power is a much easier solve than the water. The water is the one where you're always going to be like negotiating and counting and watching your meter and deciding if you can afford a shower today. But the power is once you get the hang of that, it's pretty consistent. The only thing I will say that really surprised us was this winter. Winter was a lot harder because the days are shorter. So not only were we getting less solar because the day ended at 4:30, we were using our furnace a lot more, and the furnace is a power hog. There will be things if you go the solar route that will affect how much power you end up having, the length of the day, your temperature, right? Like if you're running your AC or your heat more often than usual, that will affect it. But I feel like the power, once you get a handle on it, you're pretty set. Like you get to be good at that part.
And again, there's so many different options for power. Like you said, you could use a generator, whether it's inside or an exterior one. You have propane, like our RV did have some like a 40-gallon propane tank. So it ran the heater and ran the RV refrigerator. We had some solar. You could always increase the solar. But to your point, it's like there is no one size fits all. It's really getting a gauge from what I'm hearing from you. And that gauge is, what do I need to run? What kind of power do I need for me in this rig doing what you want to do? So now let me ask, what is the longest that you've done boondocking? Let me just ask it that way. I think there's more to that than just a number of days, but you do mostly boondocking. Is that correct?
We do. We have done about 100 days in a row. That's our
So wait,
longest.
100 days in a row boondocking.
Yeah, 100 days in
Okay.
a row. And not in one spot, because again, we max out at 15 days. We'll go, and normally that means you have to move around on public land. You can't just stay indefinitely on public land. There are rules about how far you have to move, and I talk about this a little bit in my ebook, but generally we'll move every 14 days. And on the way, hit up a dump station, dump all of our dirty water, and then fill up with clean water. But yes, like 100 days in a row of not having any hookups whatsoever.
Wow.
So
Okay.
to me, that means like basically indefinitely.
Yeah. And again, boondocking has its place for certain people. When I first started out, and unbeknownst to me, so when I started, as I've told this story before, Dan and I started during COVID as well. He said he was in the entertainment industry as well. And he said, hey, there's no money coming in right now, no chance for the entertainment industry to open back up anytime soon. Let's just sell everything and go buy an RV and be full time on the road. I had been in an RV a total of 7 nights. That was my experience in 2 separate times. And I've been quote unquote camping in a tent maybe 2 weekends. So this was really foreign to me. And we decided to buy, I finally said, okay, we bought the RV. And I said, let's stay close to where we launched from, which was in Las Vegas. And we went to Lake Mead to the campground. Didn't think anything of it. There was no hookups there. There was a water spigot. If you had a long enough hose, you could attach and get some fresh water. But to dump, you had to pack it all up. We have a 40-foot Monaco Diplomat, 2 slides, the whole thing. We had to pack it all up to go up to the dump to dump. And not only that, we had a problem with the fresh water tank because the person who owned the RV had put all this pink stuff in it to winterize. So I kept smelling it. People said, oh, it's not harmful. No, I'm not drinking this.
Yeah, no, that doesn't smell good.
No, that doesn't smell good. I have a keen sense of smell. So it was making me crazy. We were packing up every 4 or 5 days to dump. What I've come to realize is that was boondocking. We did not have power. We didn't have.
I know, that's boondocking.
That's boondocking. Okay, so I've done
You
it.
got thrown in the deep end for sure.
For sure. And not only that, we were there for 30 days. You could stay there for 30 days. Then I think we dumped, we moved, and we stayed 2 more weeks because we couldn't leave at that time. We were waiting for things to get settled. So really, I don't want to tell anybody, but 45 days of this. And so I survived.
That's a hard way to start, I will say.
But you know what? Because I didn't know what I didn't know. Yeah. Maybe it was, I don't know. But anybody who knows Dan knows that he gets this idea, he goes for it. And I was enjoying myself. We were right by the lake. It was beautiful. Met amazing people, did so much. We were taking trips and experiencing things in the area. So I don't know. It was a risky thing. Yeah, for sure. And but I'll tell you, I then got somewhere where we had full hookups and
this is the life.
This is life. Yes, yes. And we would go into campgrounds and they had pools and hot tub. This is life. But anyway, yeah. So it's definitely finding where that sweet spot is. Some people like you can be off grid all the time with those dumps and taking care of things and being right back to being out in a national park somewhere. That sounds great.
It's so beautiful. I feel for sure the full hookup life is the luxury life. We stayed at a campground for a couple weeks recently and my kids were like, we love the pool. But I will say my oldest did say at the end of the stay, she was like, I actually miss boondocking. And I was like, wow, really? And she was like, yeah, I like that I can just run outside and go dig holes and just like there are no rules and I go play and they're observing lizards and birds and just being a little bit feral. And she was like, oh yeah, I forgot when we're in a campground, we have to stay in our spot and not bother the neighbors and not yell too loud. And there's a time and a place for both. But I do think that's beyond the absolutely amazing views that we get boondocking and the fact that it's free 99. Beyond that, there's a lot of benefit to having our 3 kids just out being wild outside, doing what they want, living in nature. It's really nice to not have to worry, that parenting thing where you're like, I don't want anyone to be bothering them or them to be bothering anyone else. And I don't want them to be accidentally destroying the neighbor's sewer hookup. It's nice to just let them go outside and be free.
Okay. And that was what I was going to ask, why you chose boondocking, but you certainly answered that question. And that sounds like an amazing life for you guys and the kids. If they're having a meltdown at dinner time, nobody's looking, judging, seeing it.
We're like, whatever.
Just you. Whatever. Okay. It happens and it happens to all of us. So let me just take a break. But then when I come back, I want to talk about your ebooks. I want to talk about Alaska with Kids. I want to talk about homeschooling and we've got a lot more to talk about. But as we travel around, you and I have talked, we both have diesel vehicles and we want to save money. So, as you said, great thing about boondocking is the money that you're saving. I use Open Roads fuel cards for my diesel, and I have saved so much money. Now, you said you've also used the card, but you sometimes forget. I'm going to call you out on it. So, let me just explain to the listeners Open Roads fuel card, the card is free to sign up. There's a link in the show notes to get to it. If you forget the name, you attach your bank card, and then I have an app on my phone that shows me all the gas stations in the area that have diesel, what the cost is, what my savings is going to be. And I got into the habit of using it. I have, like, for my car, regular gas card, and I forget to use that. It saves me money. You would think I would use it all the time.
I know.
So
It's not a small amount either. It's a lot. Diesel is not cheap, and saving on filling my giant truck is a big deal.
Exactly. And so once I got in the habit of Open Roads, it almost became a game because I get on my app and I'd say, okay, so I'm in Pennsylvania right now. And if anybody knows this area, I'm on the east coast of Pennsylvania. And there's a number of states I can get to very quickly. Most people where I am in Pennsylvania always know that if you go to Delaware, which is 15, 20 minutes away, you could save on regular gas. They always said less expensive gas prices, as well as getting to New Jersey. They have less expensive gas prices. So with the Open Roads fuel card, it almost became this game of, okay, which states are we going to go through? How long do I have? Like, how much gas is available? And I say, oh, can we make it to the next state? Because it would be 4, 5, 6, sometimes 10 cents or more less. And when you've got 125-gallon fuel tank, which we had, it became huge saving. So because it became a game, like for me to go into a gas station that didn't take the Open Roads card was just, I couldn't handle it. Because
I love that you gamified it. That's really smart.
Yeah, I did. And poor Dan, we didn't ever like getting below half a tank. But if I wanted to get to a state where we could save money, he's like, all right, we're going to be cutting it close, but okay. And I will say we never once ran out of gas. So that's a good thing. But Open Roads fuel card. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. So let's talk a little bit. Obviously, you homeschool the kids. They are young. How's that working? Talk to our listeners about homeschooling.
I feel like I am more zen about it than most people, probably because I was actually homeschooled up until 6th grade. I feel like slightly like a proof of concept. Like, I turned out okay. I ended up with a graduate degree. I have friends. I can let go of the stress that I feel like a lot of parents feel like, oh my gosh, are they going to have friends? Are they going to be able to go to college? Yes, they're going to be fine. I now have a rising 4th grader and a rising 1st grader, and still just playing around 3rd kiddo. And I hadn't ever intended to homeschool them. They were in public school in New York City when we left. But it has been the greatest gift, I feel, unexpectedly, to get to educate them and educate myself together. I feel like I'm constantly homeschooling myself. And traveling is it just makes homeschooling so fun because you can do things like we wanted to learn about how airplanes work. And so we listened to a bunch of podcasts about the Wright brothers and read some books. And then we went and stood in Kitty Hawk where they launched their first flights and walked the length of how far they flew the first time and then how far they got the second time. And finally, by the 4th time, it was like a legitimate looking flight. And my kids will never forget that. Because when you have these sort of visceral, in-person physical experiences, it just clicks so firmly and deeply. And I just love the combination of homeschooling on the road, which a lot of people call road schooling. I think it just gives so many learning opportunities. It would be like hard to not be learning while you're living this life. It's like learning smacks you in the face every day. So it feels like it's not a challenge. I would say the biggest challenge about road schooling, homeschooling, being with your family all the time is that you, as the teacher, never get a break.
That is true. My kids went to regular public school, and I was a teacher for actually 20 years. And I will say, and I've had people that I've spoken to, a woman in particular I spoke to that was talking about how she was homeschooling the kids. And I said that I had been a teacher, and it was a shame. She physically took a step back as if I
Oh,
were going to judge her. And I said, no, listen, what you're doing is fantastic. This school environment is not for everyone. And I should probably do a whole podcast on it, because I think for a lot of kids, the school environment is not the best place. I won't go down that rabbit hole right now, but anybody who is working to homeschool their kid, it's like you said, it's messy. There's no right and wrong. There's no perfect, but those lessons they are learning, they're not going to forget. They're not, they're not going to forget those lessons. So I think that you can't screw it up. You can't go wrong. I don't think parents are expected to know it all. You can't go wrong. Now, I am going to have, now that we brought it up, somebody on the show that is doing a podcast on homeschooling. He and his friends were homeschooled throughout, and he's just a wealth of information, has a lot to share. But I love hearing from parents of, you know what? The schools screw it up too sometimes.
I mean,
We're
yeah,
all
there is
doing
no
the
perfect
best. There's
education.
exactly.
And
There's
I
no
do feel like a
perfect.
lot of parents feel like, oh, I don't have a teaching degree, so I could never. And I'm like, you don't have to have a teaching degree. You're a human who's living an adult human life. And that's what we're wanting for our kids, right? We're wanting to raise them into being good humans. And you don't need a teaching degree for that. And again, I feel like just living together your lives all day and traveling and seeing the world together is such an education, even just accidentally. And
Absolutely.
if there are things that you're concerned about being able to competently handle, there are ways that you can mitigate that. You can buy a curriculum for, if you're afraid of middle school math, you can give them a middle school math curriculum where you don't have to know anything. Or you can use tools like OutSchool. We have taken a lot of OutSchool classes for things, niche things that my daughter is interested in. Like she took a Greek mythology multi-week class with a Greek mythology expert, because I was like, I have some basic Greek mythology knowledge, but I'm not an expert. And I saw my kid, between the OutSchool classes and the field trips we've taken and the podcast she has listened to and the library books she has read, she has a college level understanding of Greek mythology. I am not exaggerating. And that didn't come from me. That came from me providing her resources.
Right.
You don't have to be a subject matter expert on everything. You just have to be putting in the work to provide the resources for your kids. And I will say really quick, because the library is a huge resource for homeschooling, I have compiled on my blog, ophaelinadventures.com, 200 plus, I think it's 235 libraries all over the continent that will give you a visitor guest pass, either for free or for cheap. And so we do that. We use our Kindle with our home library, and we visit libraries in the places that we visit and check books out all the time. So I put that list together for travelers, particularly for homeschool parents who are looking for those kind of resources. My kids and my husband are actually at the library here right now while I'm recording.
That's why it's so quiet. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Because usually when I get on the podcast with people that have kids or dogs, or they're in a campground, I say, look, if there's noise from the kids or the dogs barking, this is as if it's live. There's not editing that stuff out. And so that's what you did. You sent them off to the library. Good thinking.
It is very quiet. Yes.
Yes. But so you have a lot of resources, and I want to talk about, again, ophaelinadventures.com, and I'll put it in the show notes. Lots and lots of resources, lots of just an incredible wealth of information as I went through your website. One of the things I want to talk about, we don't have a ton of time, but I do want to touch on going to Alaska and doing that with kids. Now, before we get into that, I want to share with people, you're taking a trip across the country or just from one state to another, or just traveling through Pennsylvania. I found the greatest toll pass, and that is called Innovative Toll Solutions. You could get there through Open Roads. Again, the link will be in the show notes. You go to myopenroads.com. This toll pass covers 48 states, all connected 40. I know, right? It's
Wait,
only
my mind is
20.
a little blown.
Okay. I began wish we had video of this, but because your reaction. So it costs $24 a year. I connected with this company about 8 months ago. All 48 states, one toll transponder in the RV. And if you get a fine, so you go somewhere, the transponder doesn't work, something goes wrong, they have concierge service that'll fix it, work it out for you, take care of it for you.
We ended up with a couple of tickets because we ended up in a state where our transponder didn't work. And I was like trying to tow the rig down the road while I'm like trying to read the sign, like, crap, how do I pay that online? And then, of course, they got mailed back to our home state and it took us 2 months to find them. And then we had to pay a late fee. I was like, man, that was an expensive tool.
Exactly. So again, the toll transponder is less than my Pennsylvania Easy Pass. That's like $25. So no big deal. But yeah, the fact that it'll cover those types of things, because that's what happened to me. I was in Texas, went through tolls. It got sent to my mailing service. By the time I got to it, it was 25 days that you had to take care of it. Yeah, it was beyond 25 days by the time I got it. So this has saved me. We've been using it seamlessly for 7-8 months.
I have to
Yes,
look into
it's
that.
yes. Information's in the show notes. But let's talk about a little bit about RV Alaska with kids. Now, you do have ebooks that you mentioned, and they're all on the website. So anybody who wants to know about boondocking, all the details are in that ebook, as well as, talking about going to Alaska with kids. You've got a lot of blogs with great information so people really can connect on your website and social media. Just real quick, where's your social media? What are you on for social media?
I'm on Instagram and it's my name. Kate O'Phelan is my handle. But if you search O'Phelan in any iteration, you will find me because apparently there are not a lot of us. It's PH, not S. That's where people get confused.
Okay. And I will make sure it's in the show notes for people and they can reach out to you and ask you questions, certainly connect with you. But let's talk a little bit about Alaska with kids.
Yeah, we went to Alaska last summer and my mind was honestly blown, like almost as blown as I was when we were talking about the toll transponder. My mind was blown in Alaska and I just kept feeling like I don't see very many people doing this. And I think it's because it feels really intimidating. It's really far. You have to drive through another country to get there. And the information that was out there was just overwhelming. So I wrote this ebook as a super simplified way to be like, here are some itineraries based on how long you have in Alaska. Here are my best tips for traveling up there. Here's everything I would do in each place that we went. We spent 4 months up there. And so I really distilled it down into what was the best of the best. What were the things that we did where I see people, like, for example, they really want to go on these sled dog tours, but a lot of the tourist stuff in Alaska is super expensive. And of course, this is our life, not a bucket list trip. It's just our life. And so I'm not going to spend $200 times 5 on a sled dog tour, even though I really would love to go sled dogging. But I found a place that I shared in the book where you can go for just 10 minutes for $10 a person. So, okay, how do we do these really amazing Alaska adventures without spending $1,000 every day? That is my hope, is to be able to inspire people. A, you can do this. It's intimidating, but I got you. And B, like, you can do it without spending 20 grand, which is like a lot of people that I see going up there. This is like a bucket list trip and they have waited their whole lives to go. And I'm like, more power to you. But that was not my experience. I can't spend $500 times 5 on a bush plane for us to fly places. Like, I had to figure out what were the really amazing experiences we could have without spending that kind of money. So that's what I've hoped to do with this book, is inspire people and make it feel accessible.
And that sounds amazing. And people can find that book easily, get to it. So much information, because Alaska is one of those places I'd like to go. And because I've heard how difficult it is getting there, we have our RV is a 2002, so old. I didn't know that I wanted to make the trip with that. So I thought, okay, I could fly in, rent something, and maybe do it that way. So now I'll have to rethink that. I like doing it on a budget.
I tried to even make it accessible for people who were driving their own rig up there, but also people who fly into Anchorage. And then there are a ton of people who do this every summer, rent an RV in Anchorage and then circle around the state for 2 weeks. So that's why I've got like different lengths of itineraries for if you've flown in and you have 2 weeks, these are the things you've got to do.
That is awesome. And that's definitely one of those things on my bucket list. And I want to hear, we're going to do the question of the week. It's time for the question of the week. And I want to hear from you what's on your bucket list. Alaska is definitely on my bucket list. Before I do that, I want to talk to people about National Indoor RV Centers because that's where I will be purchasing my next RV. They do Class A, B, and C, and they just do it right. I can't say enough about this company. So they're a dealership with 6 locations across the country, and everybody from the owner, Brett Davis, on down to everybody you meet are just people that are dedicated to the end user, the customer, doing things right, making the industry better in every way possible. Yes, I'm thinking about what my next RV will look like and what my next steps are. In the meanwhile, one of my bucket list items is definitely to fly into Alaska and do that as a tour. So now for the question of the week, I like to ask my guests, what's one of the top bucket list items that you've done or you would recommend for my RV life podcast listeners?
I feel like before we went to Alaska, people would ask me, you've been to like all the states. What was your favorite state? And I would always hem and haw. I'd be like, I really loved Northern Arizona and I loved the coast of Oregon and I really loved Northern Maine and the mountains of North Carolina. And then we went to Alaska and I was like, oh, sorry, it's Alaska. It's really just hard to beat. And it's just perfect for RVing because the cities and the towns, that's not my favorite part of Alaska. The best part of Alaska is being out in the wilderness, which is like, yeah, you have your own rig and you park it out there. It's just ideally suited for RVing. So highly recommend anyone if you ever make it up there. The more accessible places, I would say the Canadian Rocky Mountains. My mind was also absolutely blown heading there. We boondocked overlooking a glacier up in Jasper National Park. And that was really fantastic. And what remains on my bucket list is Central Mexico. I want to take my RV to Central Mexico. And so I'm hoping to do maybe next year, like Oaxaca for Day of the Dead is on my bucket list. So
wow. Now, Central Mexico, that definitely sounds like an ebook in itself. So we'll let
probably will end up being an ebook.
Yeah, because that has to be another one of those challenging things. And again, we didn't pre-do this. Alaska's on my bucket list. I do want to go out in the middle of nowhere. I want to see the Northern Lights. That is a dream. Tell me you saw them.
Photographing the Northern Lights. We saw them like 10 times. And people, if you only go for like peak tourist season in Alaska, you will not see them because it never gets dark. But if you have enough time, or if you schedule your trip on the shoulder seasons, like early May and then starting again in September, you will see Northern Lights. And it is breathtaking. It is spiritual. I highly recommend it for everyone who can possibly do it. I have photographs of the Northern Lights over our rig that just make me so happy. My kids played on a playground underneath the Northern Lights one night. You can't.
That sounds like
if you have enough time to stay into September, because that's when you start seeing them again.
Okay. So plan my trip for September. That sounds great. Now I have to plan it for after, as we talked about the Hershey RV show. So I'll plan it for after. That would be a nice, after all that work. Okay. So September it is for Alaska and the Northern Lights. Wow. It just sounds amazing. And you just make it sound amazing. Okay, so now we have to talk about featured campgrounds. This is time for the featured campgrounds of the week. You've thrown me off because that's all I can think about now. I'm going to go Google places to go in Alaska to fly there and get an RV. That sounds great. The featured campground of the week is brought to you by RV Life Campgrounds. And this week's featured campground is Drummer Boy Resort in Gettysburg, PA. This is a 1,000 trails campground. It has 450 sites. This RV resort offers many amenities, full hookups, cabin rentals, plenty to do in the campground, as well as being close to the battlefield, tours, ghost walks, and it's really close to Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Maryland, It's also pretty close to Hershey, PA. So if you're thinking about going to the Hershey RV show for a day, it's not a bad place. I wouldn't want to go back and forth each day, but if you're going to be there for a day, it's a good place to stay. Campground has a solid 6.8 rating on rvlifecampgrounds.com with 197 reviews. And you could use the book now button, which is right there on the site, to book your stay at Drummer Boy Resort. You do that by visiting campgrounds.rvlife.com. And you can also see photos, tips, the full amenities, everything you need to know about this property right there. And that is RV Life Campgrounds is part of RV Life Pro. If you're not an RV Life Pro customer, you can still see the campground. You're limited, though. I'll be honest, you're limited as to what you can see. You're looking to be an RV Life Pro member. There is a 25% discount in the show notes. And what I really love about the RV Life Campgrounds is it is the most comprehensive source. So whether you're looking at RV parks, campgrounds, resorts, you could also find city, state, and national parks, Corps of Engineers, and so much more. So any kind of camping you're looking to do, boondocking, it is there on campgrounds.rvlife.com. Okay, wow. All right, one more time, give your website, how people can reach out to you, and I'm going to go read about Alaska as soon as we get off this call.
Yes, come find me on ophalenadventures.com or on Instagram at Kate O'Phalen. I'm always responding to questions on there. I also have on my Instagram several Alaska highlights. So if you want to do a deep dive on our adventure in Alaska, you can go look at all those as well. And I hope I've influenced all of you to go to Alaska.
Absolutely. And maybe some more boondocking for people. We covered a lot today. Where are you boondocking at right now?
Twin Lakes, Colorado, which is one of the most beautiful boondocking spots that I've ever seen. So if anyone's on a Colorado adventure this summer, highly recommend figuring out how to boondock and come park here.
Okay, so now we're going to need pictures of you, the family, and where you're at right now. And we'll post them on Instagram and Facebook at RV Life Podcast. So we want to see this beautiful view. And that is the one thing I think is the most amazing about boondocking are the sites for sure. Thank you so much for the incredible wealth of information. And I think we just touched on a lot of things that people could go get more information on your website. I know I'm excited. Alaska, maybe some boondocking, some more boondocking sounds great. But thank you, Kate, so much for being with me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Yes, it was. I enjoyed it. You have been listening to the RV Life Podcast. I'm Patty Hunt, wishing you a great rest of today and an even better day tomorrow.